you just go on to Nick first of all, and then just move to the slide. Yeah, I'll press.
I do this, and you press it. Yeah. Okay, it's the beginning, right? It's a start. Yeah, perfect. Okay. Very good. Okay. So I place the mic and you press play. Yeah.
But it can help you live, I guess.
Okay, we're starting. Video link with Johannesburg. We're starting. 1, 2, 3. Go. Dear friends and colleagues.
No, 1 second.
I have to launch the video link.
How do we see it?
Well, that's the problem. We hear it, but we don't see it. It's only minutes. We speak. We can't because we don't have the cables, so we have to do it. What's that for? I will send you the MP4. C'est bon, on y va? Go.
Yeah. Roll in.
All in?
We've got power. Yeah, we're on it. And where's our feedback? It's all good.
Yeah? Can I roll? Should I take a cell phone? No. Turn in.
Dear friends and colleagues, thank you for joining us for the third session of our G7 Pension Summit here on the southern outskirts of Biarritz in Saint-Jean-de-Luz. And without further ado, I shall give the floor to our colleague Hubert Denso of Africa Investor and the NEPAD Foundations, who was unable to join us here today in Biarritz, but he shall be joining us in a few seconds live via video link from Johannesburg, South Africa. Hubert, the floor is yours.
I think my contribution personally and on behalf of Africa Investor to this session also touches on the important role that infrastructure, science and technology, engineering and mathematics can bring from an asset owner's perspective to forge partnerships with the public sector could really be encapsulated in some respects through the work that we did with the World Pensions Council, with the African Union Development Agency, and with many of you in the room and some of the wider asset owner communities. And we recognize that infrastructure as an investable asset class is quite a new phenomenon, not only to us as institutional investors, but also to the multilateral development banks, because the participation and the level of assets allocated from long-term investors to infrastructure as an investable asset classes not necessarily where we needed it to be. So in Africa, where we have approximately a $180 billion infrastructure deficit that's been projected to be at least that level over the next 10 years, we engaged our colleagues with and in partnership with the World Pensions Council to really look at what can be done to increase allocations from sort of global institutional investors into these higher growth infrastructure opportunities on the continent. And the constant feedback was, well, why should we be investing our retirees and future generations' assets into African infrastructure when there's still a low level of African asset owners' allocations to the asset class? And we quickly took on board all of those practical feedbacks, and we worked with the African heads of state, we worked with the African asset owner community. I also chair the African Sovereign Wealth Pension Fund Leaders Forum, so we brought together sort of about the top 20 chairmen and CEOs and CIOs of Africa's largest institutional investors, and we delved into some of these issues. And we all know in this room, and all of those that are logged in and here in Biarritz, that there are issues with investing in what in some cases is perceived to be an illiquid asset. In other cases, there's not enough engagement from the capital market. realize that it's got all the perfect annuities and the types of returns that we are seeking to achieve. They're monopolistic in nature. We know all the characteristics of infrastructure, but yet we have this huge deficit on the continent. So first of all, we adopted a mindset which said such a large infrastructure deficit is actually an opportunity rather than a problem. But the question was, how do we create an opportunity for us to increase our allocations in a responsible manner towards the asset class? And we realized that there are a number of different policy issues that came about as a direct consequence of the asset class being typically engaged with debt financing, and we are long-term equity investors. So as the African asset owner community, working with the World Pensions Council, we first of all said our first step is let's identify a partnership between the African asset owner community and African heads of state, which we did, and as a consequence of that we created a new framework. And that framework essentially said, on behalf of the institutional investment community to African policymakers and heads of government, if you are prepared to engage with us and align new policies and practices around PPPs in a new way, which we have now dubbed the institutional investor public partnership model, if you are now prepared to engage with us in new ways that take account of our own investment criteria, we are prepared to employ best endeavors to increase our asset allocation from the current 1 to 2% up to 5% towards infrastructure on the continent in the next 5 years. And then we set out a number of different sort of policy issues around being able to invest across continent, being able to invest in cross-border projects, being able to get a more feasible criteria around being able to use the local and domestic capital markets as potential exits, and the governments would work more closely with development finance institutions to create a thriving and sustainable secondary market for infrastructure. So this was tabled. We put together our plan and we launched that plan at NASDAQ during the UN General Assembly a couple of years ago. It was well received. It had great alignment with the UN Sustainable Development Goals and Agenda 2063 from the African Union. It was then taken by the African Union and put forward for a vote to see if it could be endorsed at the African Union Heads of State and Government Summit in Mauritania. It was formally endorsed by over 40 African heads of state, and we are now working very closely with the African Union as well as African heads of state who are now bringing together a pipeline of investable projects and programs for us as the African institutional investment community to invest in. And our commitment to that is that we will help them structure and ensure that the programs as they design them are more aligned not only to our investment criteria and mandates, but also to the aspirations of the local capital markets who are seeking more access and more liquidity and more opportunity through products, and infrastructure represents a great product in that respect. So as the African institutional investment community, we've been able to conceive this initiative, address a lot of the challenges that we heard from our global peers, just in terms of the role that we as African asset owners can take as anchor and lead investors in African infrastructure assets, and then create the appropriate co-investment environment for our global peers. What Nick and I did at Davos recently was again engage global institutional investors with this new dispensation, which suggests that we've now addressed this issue that African asset owners are now taking the lead. We're now putting in the anchor investment into infrastructure, and we're doing that at a minimum of 5%. The reciprocation that we heard and that we asked for was that global institutional investors have a great opportunity not only to get access to outsized returns in monopolistic assets with local de-risking through co-investing peer partner, which is a peer pension fund, sovereign fund, endowment or foundation, and we wanted this environment to be a international peers could be encouraged to invest what we call the 1% agenda globally to match our 5% agenda continentally, which is really to encourage our colleagues globally to invest 1% of their asset allocation and dedicate that to Africa. And we think that is already being very widely and well received. I leave here and we're working very closely with a number of global pension funds now who are looking very closely at incorporating this into their investment policy statements and their practices. So we think that this is a good demonstration initially of what can be done with thought, reaction to challenges, not sort of running away from challenges, and really being able to come out on the other side with greater alignment around issues. Now, as this gets implemented, there's absolutely no doubt this is a big tick in the win box for addressing inequality. It's a big tick in the win box for addressing inclusion, and it's a big tick in the win box for trying to resist this global trade tension. In the continent, we have just basically launched on the back of understanding that we trade to invest and we invest to trade, that there's going to be new forms of longer term capital available that will help industrial trade related complexes and infrastructure. And this was all very well understood by the heads of state who in July of this year operationalized the world's largest, by number of countries, free trade area called the Continental Free Trade Area for Africa, the CFTA. So I think this is a very real demonstration, this practical expression to the catalytic role these institutional investors can have, not just on allocations to infrastructure, but all the catalytic industries and the economic growth and the continued sustainable development that can improve as a consequence of us taking a view about how to streamline our contribution towards long-term sustainable development. But I'll let other colleagues share their views on that now. Thank you.
Are these working now?
Hello? Yeah.
Hello?
Hello? Yeah.
Is this one working?
Good afternoon, I'm Christopher Smith. I'm the Branch Secretary of Westminster Unison and I'm the Pensions Board Member, one of the Pensions Board Member for Westminster City Council's Local Government Pension Scheme. I'm going to introduce to you Suzanne Bishforik. Suzanne is the Managing Partner of Global Sovereign Advisors, and she was also the former Chief Investment Officer of the United Nations Staff Pension Fund. Also, on her right is Valerie Eastman-George. Valerie is one of the board members on the London Borough of Islington's Local Government Pension Fund, and she's also the Equalities Officer at Hackney Council.
Hackney Unison.
Hackney Unison. Welcome.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. We're happy to be here, and we applaud the environmental policies in France to have such a beautiful day. ESG is important to us, and this is just a reminder of how lovely life can be if ESG principles are followed. France has set a great example for us all, and thank you for the invitation. Our topic is less happy. We're going to talk about women's empowerment and empowerment of others who are kind of left out of the pension system. You know, now that Rosie the Riveter has retired, you know, that heroic example of women helping fight the war that our freedom today, had a sad ending. As soon as the war was over, the men came back to work and the women were told to step aside. This led to a gap in pension coverage for women, which is now affecting women in retirement. Similarly, in World War II, there were over 1 million African troops fighting to liberate Europe, especially right here in France. And fortunately this year, with the 75th anniversary of D-Day, the President of France this contribution a bit belatedly, but representatives from Guinea, Algeria, Cote d'Ivoire, Morocco were honored for landing in Normandy and Provence to liberate France. Back to the statistics on the pensions. This year's report from the World Economic Forum showed the average women's pension pot to be 30 to 40% less than a man's. That's a big discount. And obviously it's cumulative, because if you start with Rosie retiring in 1945, earning a low income and then nothing, by the time she retires, she will have less. Fortunately, women have made progress since 1945, but the damage of lower income and savings into retirement. The EU isn't really any better off than the United States. The EU average women's income is, a pension is 35.7% lower than a man's. So these are not just poor US statistics. On top of that, women live longer, thank God, but we need more care for chronic, debilitating diseases. And since women are likely to outlive their life partners, they need to pay for care, which they provided for free to their older spouse. That is a difference. And I will switch to Valerie simply so we'll have some exchange of personalities and not a monologue.
For me, I look at economic empowerment and you think, what is that about? I look at women in Europe, in UK, and a global perspective, women in emerging nations, Africa, because we mustn't forget the sisters internationally. Then I look at myself, look at my story and my journey to where I am today. For jobs, training, economic activity, entrepreneurs, women, as has been pointed out, were instrumental in the war. They made them a nation. And they also served as carers, and that's unpaid, and that is global. And economically, it's not valued at all. There should be shared care where women do not lose out on opportunities because of caring roles. And when you look at women in Africa, emerging nations, they've already also lost out on education because of cultural reasons. The rural women, they do agriculture, farming. That's a mainstay apart from natural resources of African countries. But that is not valued. They remain just farm hands. They have no access to land rights. Culturally, they have to go to a panel in a village of men to make decisions. They cannot just go to the bank and raise finance funding, because again, they need a man to be a guarantor. When you look at Africa, a lot of the economists, the market traders, you look at Ghana, Kumasi market, it's women holding, being a backbone of the economy, running it. But yet they're just market traders. That is a problem women have, being in the informal sector. They're not unionized, putting on my union hat, where that's collective bargaining. They can use that leverage on governments if they're not doing the right things. Additionally, it has worked. I have seen it. I have met a cocoa farmer, and she was a woman. Cocoa, that's on the world market, on the stock exchange. So that's, they can take it further, but because women are not given the capital access, they remain at the petty trader level at that place. So these are the things we have to be looking at when you actually think of the economic. Women, yes, can be empowered, you look at migrant workers, predominantly women. Myself, I'm not a migrant to the UK, but families abroad, and the remittances, women of Filipino background, the governments abroad, they rely on those remittances. They form a huge part of the GDP. Women generate wealth, but they're not empowered economically. It's not translated into a voice. The market traders, they pay taxes, but yet they have no influence on what the council is doing. That is why, again, I look at myself. We, the women that are empowered, we need to play a role to educate those women, organize them, how they can influence democratic structures and translate that power into effectiveness so that there is equity in redistribution of wealth. So I'm going to get to you.
That's exactly the point I was about to make, because the progress is there. However, it's incredibly slow. When Helen Gurley Brown wrote her book that was a bestseller, Sex and the Single Woman, the idea was women were going to have it all. They were going to be the equal of men. At that time, of course, women earned 60 cents per dollar in the United States and an even lower percentage in Europe. And now, in 2019, women are approaching men's income. Globally, 16 to 24-year-olds are close to 90% of a man's income. But women who started early are still in the 70% category because the low wage starting rate is cumulative. You don't get past it. The average woman in America is earning 81 cents per dollar compared to a man. Yes.
Yes, that is an issue. Women find ourselves, the vast majority of women at the bottom of the pile. That is this issue of the gender pay gap. The men and women doing similar jobs, but there's no parity in terms of income. The women, especially in the informal sectors, most women are casual workers, the temporary staff. They're on low pay. In the UK, we have a phenomenon, which is a scandal, called the 0 hours contract, which many women, because they do care work, they find themselves. You have a contract, but you don't know whether you could work on Tuesday. Tomorrow you can just do 2 hours. And also the issue of maternity rights and maternity. I look at my story when I started in local government over 20 years ago. I was a careerist. My career was going up, I was single, and I went to the highest level. But once I got married and had 2 maternity breaks, my career reached a plateau as a managerial structure. So this maternity, because of that, women find we disadvantaged, excluded. The women on maternity leave, once they come back, they're first on the redundancy list to be made redundant. And paternity care, we have to look at sharing.
Valerie and I have very similar lucky experiences because we both had paid maternity leave. We were allowed to come back to jobs. There was some job security because we were in the public sectors. I was in the United Nations where a woman got 12 weeks of maternity leave and it was paid. I think I was the only woman from my Harvard Business School class with an MBA who had such an entitlement. And it's really important, not just because of the need for maternity leave, but what happens if you don't have paid maternity leave is women leave the workforce and they can't get back. In the United States today, it is as easy to get a job after having taken a year of time off to take care for a child as it is to get a job after coming out of prison. That is a huge barrier. So even though the wage gap is shrinking and the pay scales becoming more equal, the fact that women have these gaps in employment to take care of children and also for older relatives means that there is a period in their lives where they're earning 0 and they're not saving, and they're not contributing to any defined contribution or defined benefit plan.
Can I come into that? So, women, we find ourselves in a vicious cycle of poverty, I would say. So because you had a low paid employment or you are on 0 hours contract, a casual worker, you don't even have the entitlement to join a pension scheme. And even if you did join, the average local government pension is just 5,000 an annum. So imagine if you were a low paid worker, you could not even get enough to survive on. So these are the issues we have to be looking at. But coming to that, and with pension, the empowerment, I just want to bring in my story. I was one of the first women when the local government pension scheme, as a result of Lord Minor's intervention, changed. We were the first pilots, and I was the only woman there to be trained to go to the pension board. But my journey took me 6 years. I just about got on the pension board this year, having gone through obstacles. So because women need to be in the decision-making process, the democratic process where we can influence change. At this point, having gone into the boardroom, and I've seen a minority, in my case of 2 women, and I've seen the investment fund managers, and you think, well, how many women have that access to be making critical decisions on investments? And even women, even if they earn high or they earn low, that limits their ability to be able to invest. And even when women earn, because of maternity, not job insecurity and the fears, they're not willing to take a risk with the investment. So these are the things we have to be looking into.
So Valerie, Suzanne, what do you think should be happening in terms of reducing the gender pay gap, which will help reduce the pension pay gap?
Well, there's actually a wonderful report sponsored by the government of France on the Biarritz Partnership for Gender Equality, and that was part of the G7 meetings today. The paper called Equal Income and Pensions was released, I believe, on the 20th of August. We'll double check. But I highly recommend you read that paper. There's 79 different recommendations about how this can be fixed. Because the truth of the matter is, as Valerie and I pointed out, pensions develop over a career. They're not something you do overnight. So chronic underpayment, chronic gaps in employment, low education, low participation, underinvestment of assets, these compound. By the same token, if we follow some of the good recommendations in the Biarritz Partnership for Gender Equality, in the long run, women and men will both come out better.
And the women and men, there has to be a partnership. See gender matters as a women's only issue. The men too have to come on board, because I mean I have seen examples, for instance, where a male colleague of mine, he's taking his paternity leave because his wife earns more than him. And that's another point I wanted to make. A lot of, in the ethnic minorities community, the women are the major breadwinners. They head families, and people are here and they maintaining families in Africa as well, and invariably governments, because of, as I said, remittances they send in home. So it's a matter of also the partnership to be able to address this issue, so that we have an across the board view on it.
The terrible thing is the penalty is not simply a question of 1 or 2 countries. It's pretty much everywhere, and we've seen even in supposedly advanced economies like Denmark, a woman's income dives off a cliff when she has that first baby, because the work at home impedes her ability to network outside of office hours. You don't go out for drinks with the guys and the boss if you have to be home to relieve the babysitter at 6 p.m. And maybe your travel schedule is reduced. You know, I remember famously even Kofi Annan said I shouldn't go to Baghdad because I had a young child. And they said, well, we need her, and so I went anyway. But many assignments, the riskier assignments, the more innovative assignments are denied to women because the assumption is she has to be home with a baby.
Yes, because I know also once the 50-50 campaign for women representation, I know there were women MPs that I wouldn't say rebel, but they affirmed their rights as parents not to be in debates up to midnight in the Houses of Parliament, because that's a thing they could see as you're not capable because you have to go home and have look after children, and women want an area where parents, not women only, you could take your children to work, or women who like breastfeeding, they return back to work. To be that facility made. So that's again the empowerment of women and barriers into the democratic and political structures. Because if women are to have change, we need women across the board at all levels to bring the lower paid up, and those in those structures or in the financial world, or if you're on the stock market and all that, yeah, you shouldn't be compelled to be working long hours and all the rest of it. You have to be able to have a choice. And also just a small point in terms of exclusion, there are a lot of home working now happening in the UK, where with even the local authorities, people are forced to work from home. That may not be conducive. It's a world of interaction where women, that's an opportunity to leave the home and meet other people, and then they find themselves isolated. So all of these are the all-encompassing issues that we need to be looking at and addressing.
Valerie, I'm glad you brought that up.
Yes.
So many things in the traditional work environment that we talk about that just don't fit the careers of people with small children. You know, a woman is better off if she can afford paid childcare, which is expensive in most countries, and paid maternity leave, which does not exist in the U.S. But also, you need an economic environment that's strong enough to allow for change. Women's income was picking up pretty slowly but steadily until the great financial crisis in 2008. Since then, there's been almost no progress, and in many countries, backsliding. Because if the men feel shortchanged, and they have been hurt by the financial crisis too, they don't have excess earnings in their financial institution to provide training for women or slightly better office facilities to allow for childcare. These are quote-unquote luxuries that struggling financial institutions just can't spend the money on right now. So we've seen a real pause in the progress the women were making up until 2008. And I've even seen in meetings, for example, last October in Bali, IMF meetings, there was a full day of panel meetings such as ours today in Biarritz, where I saw only men on the panels. Again, when people are afraid of their own incomes, they don't open the door for the others. And right now, women are not being added to the equation.
My final point is to collective bargaining, unionization, because I'm not saying it's an answer, but it helps where women can get together to be able to address the issues. As I said, those of us that are enlightened can mentor, we can support, and we can have more people, women only shortlist and affirmative action to get into the democratic and political processes, boards of companies, pensions boards, so that we can make a difference to help the gender equality.
That's a very valid point about pensions boards, because most elderly people are women, so they should be a majority of boards. And again, I want you to be sure to read the Biarritz Partnership for Gender Equality report. There are many recommendations, but the 4 key ones equal pay for equal work. We're making progress. Second, equal access to financing, including venture capital. Women entrepreneurs have a much tougher time getting loans or venture capital or private equity investments. Equal access to education. And somebody needs to pay for what is now unpaid work. And that could be child care or care for the elderly. Because right now, women are doing that as a second shift. And it's an unpaid second shift. That needs to be changed.
Suzanne, how much do you think that these changes would add to the world GDP in terms of billions or trillions?
I don't have the figure, but Melinda Gates wrote a book this year that had a study of how that would improve the world's GDP, and it was a very nice number. So let's go back and check.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Suzanne. Thank you, Valerie.
Thank you very much. So we have time for one or two questions from the floor, perhaps. Or perhaps maybe Nick can say a few words about Australia.
I think the
Microphone. You could continue.
Make sure it's switched on. Up. I think that would be great.
I'm on camera. I think as guests have covered the issues well. The only issue I'd point out is that in a DC system, because the same challenge in Australia, the outcome for women is lower than for men for a couple of reasons. One is wages are about 11 or 12% lower in Australia on average. Also, many women have breaks from work for obvious reasons. So it's a global set of issues and how it's challenged, how it's changed for the better. Certainly the issues around ensuring pension coverage and payments are made during periods of work break for family reasons is an important public policy issue. So, but thank you. Similar issues in Australia.
Julia?
Thank you very much. It's to be part of this seminar based on also the discussion, and I really appreciate the fact that we have this different and issues and pillars of the NTG agenda, women empowerment, discussed and also in a very vibrant manner. So I've been just sort of messaging to my LinkedIn media actually the updates from the panel. Really, really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Well, I did want to echo the thank you for very ended on an inspiring note. I mean, would you have any practical solutions for investors who are trying to, if they say a certain percentage of equity in a company, what can they do to help promote portfolio companies?
Governance is really important, and you see supposedly innovative companies going public with no women on the boards at all. Don't invest in them. It's sending you a very loud and clear signal, and to avoid those companies that have women on the board actually perform better in the stock market. So that's the second reason. But see what they're really doing, and it's still going to be a long haul. But if we pay attention and we monitor progress will continue.
My point would be, though, as board members, we have fiduciary duties, but like child labor, I will be looking at companies that have women like doing all this farming, maybe to plant cocoa and all the nice luxuries we enjoy in the West, and question whether we should be investing in those companies.
Valerie, Suzanne, thank you very much from the World Pensions Council, Biarritz, at the G7 Summit on the Fringes.
together.
You can leave your glasses on the road. Just worried someone will tread on you.
Can you film back the screen for 8 minutes?
Sorry?
We're filming back the screen for 8 minutes.
Cool.
So good. I think we should make like a
So we're not finished yet.
Yeah. Okay, yeah.
We need like a few more minutes. So just an 8-minute live connection with Washington DC, and then 4 minutes Dan and I, and then we finish. Okay, we'll.
Yeah, so we're not under the shade.
There's 8 minute video.
Screen.
I speak a minute, so it's okay. And it goes well, I think, whatever.
On count of 3. 1, 2, change to 3.
Sure.
Oh, but that's
Always
great.
on
I
the
think
same
that's
side.
How's that, AJ? Is it a bit exposed? 1, 2, 3.
Doesn't need to be perfect, huh?
Yeah, we're just going to get it good, not perfect.
this camera's so weird.
Do you want to?
It's going to be
Yeah,
down
background
one.
isn't
So
too
it's
exposed.
going to get, yeah.
Come up fine.
You mean like the white?
Almost out of power. We got one good picture.
Alright, no
Yes.
worries. On the count of 3 will be 1.
So we start with, if you sit down again, that
Ah,
would be
ok,
better.
c'est la même manip qu'avant, c'est la même cause.
Yes,
On produit
please.
des effets.
I'll roll what you say.
This?
All right. Do you have my number? So just
Yeah, I don't have yours. We'll get. Okay.
Oh, that's a good idea,
You have your phone? Okay. Great. So we have our gadgets.
Yeah.
Right, focus on Nick is good.
You know how well. Is that right? That was very heavy.
Was it? Yeah, we wanted it. We don't want people to sleep in the siesta time. So we have to kind of keep people awake.
That's the best one. That's the best one.
That's me and I'm on
Great.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
That's very easy. And mobile phone also? Shall I
Yeah,
send
yes.
it to you? Great.
Yeah.
I'll send it to you.
All right,
Yes.
welcome back to the G7 Pensions Dialogue here on the outskirts of Biarritz. And I'm delighted to introduce you now to our last plenary speaker du jour, who will be joining us live via video link from Washington, D.C. It's Lauren Burnhill, her reputation precedes her. She's really one of the thought leaders and intellectual and practical pioneers in the field of impact investing applied to emerging markets and developing economies. And without further ado, I shall hand the floor electronically to Lauren Burnhill from Washington, D.C. Lauren, to you.
Bonjour, good morning. My name is Lauren Burnhill, and I'm the Managing Director of One Planet Ventures, a consultancy I formed in 2009 to help companies and financial firms develop a meaningful and practical approach to ESG impact and responsible investment. The fact of the matter is today regulators are increasingly framing ESG, environmental, social, and governance, as a fiduciary responsibility. Now, ESG was first developed as a niche equity strategy about 10 years ago, and it was meant to incorporate a discerning view of environmental, social, and governance practices into investment decision-making. It was viewed as niche because classical economists say that environmental and social impacts of investment are externalities. And increasingly, we have come to realize that that's just not true. A negative externality that we fail to take into account can turn into a tremendous financial liability. And at the same token, a positive externality that we have not made explicit is a missed opportunity to build trust and brand reputation. And in fact, increasing climate risks have upped the urgency of this discussion and really intensified the issue of performance risk as a result of climate change. The bad news is that there are as many interpretations of ESG as there are days in the year. That means it's virtually impossible for regulators to develop meaningful and practical guidance around the term ESG. I think what they really mean is we all need to practice responsible investment. There's no doubt that environmental and social impact management is part of your fiduciary duty, regardless of the regulatory regime you operate under. And that's because if your beneficiaries, if your members see their livelihoods, their homes, their well-being destroyed risk impacts all sectors of the economy: agriculture, industry, technology, education, transportation, workforce productivity, affordable housing, and distribution. The infamous last mile of every supply chain is dependent on all kinds of infrastructure and transportation. The good news, though, you don't need to figure out ESG to practice responsible investment. Risk analysis really just needs to reflect logical questions about environmental and social factors that can impact financial performance. What could disrupt business operations? Floods, droughts, raw materials shortages. Think about the quantity of rare minerals and metals in your cell phone. Consumer boycotts. We can't predict the black swans that might disrupt business operations, but most environmental and social risks are part of long-term trends that we can see and appreciate today, even if there is significant uncertainty as to how they will play out in the long run. Where there's risk, there's opportunity. An increasing body of research, both equities and fixed income, shows that companies who manage their own ESG risk and therefore have higher scores on a variety of ESG benchmarks and indices tend to outperform competitors who focus only on short-term financial results. Not surprisingly, one of the reasons for this is that companies that have this risk management awareness around environmental and social factors tend to be better managed with longer-term visions of what would make for a successful company in a changing economic and climate environment. Companies don't have to solve all of the problems or risks that they identify. In fact, they can't. We don't have solutions for everything, and we don't know the extent to which some of these dramatic changes are going to play out in the future. What they do know and need to do, and what you need to do, is to ask relevant questions now and on an ongoing periodic basis pretty much forever. Increasing data collection and improved analytics means that we're getting better answers to the questions we have. We're able to answer more of the questions that we can identify at this stage. And that means that we're looking at better outcomes even in the face of increased risk. We can create alpha from environmental and social risk. One of the things we need to do is change investment structures and the incentives around the issuance of those debt and equity instruments. Longer-term financing can reduce performance and default risks, as well as provide better asset and liability matching, particularly for pension funds. And that's especially true in infrastructure, where financing longer-life assets with short and medium-term money really makes no sense, and in fact can increase default risk unnecessarily. But we need to recognize that investment bankers make their money on fee income, usually upfront fee income. So they have a disincentive to structure longer-term investments. We need to think about pay-for-performance type features that can incorporate periodic evaluations, benchmark targets, potential incentive payments that could overcome those disincentives and encourage financial sector actors to design instruments that really meet the needs of the underlying assets and the asset owners. Immediate disinvestment of the risk that you find and the things that you don't feel belong in your portfolio isn't the only way to practice sustainable and responsible investment. In fact, a gradual, measured approach may be the more prudent way to go, particularly if you're combining that by engaging in a dialogue with the companies in your portfolio that you're thinking you would like to divest. An example of that is Shell is a fossil fuel company, and yet Moody's in its most recent credit review pointed out that the company's risk management and investment in renewable energy actually makes them a better credit risk than many of their peers, and they did in fact once again receive an investment grade rating. A gradual, thoughtful rebalancing of your portfolio can have immediate trust and reputation benefits, particularly if you communicate what you're doing, not just with your shareholders, but with a broader group of stakeholders, and you regularly provide information as to what you have been doing and how that changes over time as new data and information becomes available. Refining due diligence and credit policies to take these factors into account and to favor companies that have a proactive approach to their own environmental and social risk can improve both your short-term and long-term financial returns. There are a lot of new opportunities coming up in addition addition to rethinking your current portfolio. Civic tech, companies that are making government data available for private use, kinds of analytics we need. Transparency technology, applications of blockchain, ZKP, zero knowledge proof that provide for data privacy but true verification of parties in a transaction. Data technology, artificial intelligence, deep machine learning, all of those are new investment opportunities emerging as a result of this changing climate and economic environment. The bottom line, risk needs to be identified, analyzed, and managed through ongoing processes and practices. That's sometimes referred to as ESG integration. You could call it responsible investment integration. It's really about knowing what you have now, what you would like to do, and changing your internal policies and practices so that you can do that in a meaningful way without incurring necessarily lots of additional expense or having any kind of negative impact on your operations. The flip side of risk is absolutely opportunity. When we look at the potential problems that can arise from climate risk, we also need to see that means there are opportunities to make better investment decisions where climate risk is being managed appropriately. Regular communication with shareholders and stakeholders, transparency, if you will, increases engagement even when that risk is present. I think most organizations and individuals are aware that we don't yet have all of the solutions to climate change and extreme weather. What they want to know is that we're aware of what's going on and that we're doing something to respond in a way that is adaptive and resilient, not just trying to go back to what used to be in a world that no longer exists. The time to act is now. Regulators are increasingly taking action, but they can lack the resources to really identify the best actions that could be taken. Companies and investors who develop policies and practices now can look to and maybe even expect to have their systems grandfathered in as regulation emerges. And that can avoid some potentially disruptive impacts of whatever happens on with untested legislation that is being put into place. I realize this is quite a broad body of information that I've condensed into about 10 minutes. I would be happy to speak with you and or your organizations about any of these topics and any specific issues within these topics. At any point, you can find me on LinkedIn. Send me a message. I would be happy to talk further. Thank you for your time and attention. Have a great day. Bye-bye.
Merci. And for once, you have the right number of microphones. Okay, let's be seated. Voila. Hop. Julia. Can you take a few pictures from there? From behind. From And now on to the last short closing session. I want to thank you all for having attended the G7 Pensions dialogue here on the outskirts of Biarritz in Saint-Jean-de-Luz. It was a very passionate, intense debate, particularly the previous roundtable about women empowerment and women in the workforce was really fascinating. It was really great. And I want to thank one more time Susan Bishoprick, who's the former CIO of the UN Joint Staff Pension Fund. And to be here today, it was a pleasure to hear what she had to say. And also, Valerie Eastman-George, who's a trustee at Islington Pension Scheme in London, but she's also a Unison Labour delegate, and so is our friend here. You don't see him, but hello, Chris Smith, and he's also a pension trustee from Westminster Borough of Westminster and Unison too. So we're glad to have such a high representation from Unison. And now I know that all of you are exhausted because it's been a very intense day, so I don't want to be the last barrier between you and the beaches of Biarritz and Saint-Jean-de-Luz. So we shall make the closing session quick, just a few words and a general wrap up, and perhaps some geo-economic, to use a fancy term, from Professor Edward Luttwak, some geo-economic considerations to close the G7 Pension Summit. And to my right is Dan Fritzen, who flew all the way from New York City, and we're delighted to have him because his flight came yesterday. It was a big journey because of all the police barriers, but he made it valiantly to our seminar, and I want to thank him for that. And what's really interesting, because most of the speakers until now were pension CIOs, pension executives, pension board members, pension administrators and trustees, or sovereign fund people. Now we have another kind of animal to my right. It's an investor category that has been growing a lot in size and sophistication in the recent past. It's family offices and endowments. And I shall say that Dan came with two hats from New York. He's an MD for Arrivato Family Office in New York City, but he's also a founding board member of the CFA Society of New York Asset Owners Series, chaired by our friend Tom Briganti. And without further ado, I'll let you say a few words about the CFA's AOS gathering, and I think you have something to say about an upcoming event.
Thank you, Nicholas. Just wanted to again thank you for very, very glad to be here at the G7 Pensions Dialogue, co-organized by the World Pensions Council and by Africa Investor. And I'm the co-founders of the CFA Society of New York Asset Owner Series, which seeks to foster high-level dialogue between asset owners. So obviously mostly pension owners here, but as a single family office person, we're trying to help build the high-level dialogue, especially on critical issues like ESG or SDG, if you prefer, and really to get all the asset owners to help work together to create a better investment community, a better world. And we understand pension funds have been among the leaders in responsible investing and in really thinking long-term about the future. And family offices are eager to help in that effort. And the Asset Owner Series has hosted over 65 trillion of assets under management at events across 3 continents. We have an upcoming summit the 23rd and the 24th of September in New York. ESG and Climate Asset Owner Summit. So across a variety of classes of asset owners, we'll all be speaking about many of the same issues we have today. And just to say briefly, as asset owners, we all know that there is a lot of capital and difficulty in finding good quality assets, but that is not a reason to hold back on ESG or SDG, but rather a reason to double down on it, because SDG investing is good investing. It's a false dichotomy, as Susan Bishop pointed out, with companies with more inclusive management have better performance, but across the board, socially productive investments are good investments, especially for those of us who do the long-term type investments.
Thank you, Dan. And I'm aware of time, but just closing up the session with Dan to my right, and then evening at our pre-conference dinner, and he was a big fan or keen reader of Ed Luttwak, and that before becoming a financial expert, he was a young historian. He had read history at Columbia University, and I think in this day and age, which Ed Luttwak called the geo-economic era, or the geo-economic age in which we are entering, or in which we may have entered when the Brexit vote happened, and when Donald J. Trump entered the White House. In that geo-economic age, studying history will be as important as knowing how to calculate financial and economic ratios. And the reason why history and geopolitics are becoming very important right now for asset owners, be they Australian pension funds investing in China or Indonesia, or be they simply, Western European pension funds investing in Portugal or Greece and having to assess political and country risk. So country risk is really moving to the fore, for better or for worse, because we are really witnessing the end of an era, which is the neoliberal. I think we mentioned it repeatedly this morning, the Milton Friedman neoliberal era, and entering that new world. And we're not sure what it is. Maybe it's not geoeconomics, maybe it's the era of SDG. But it could be both the era of SDG idealism and cynical geoeconomics at the same time, as we say in French, or as the French presidents like to say, et en même temps, at the same time. We shall see, but to make a long story, to really stress that geoeconomic impact, since we have spoken already a lot about idealism and SDG and greening, why geoeconomics? Simply to really echo what the Right Honourable Nick Cherry was saying earlier today. It's the weight, the political and strategic weight of nations today, including G7 nations, is to a large extent determined by the size of the assets owned collectively by its asset owners. And that's really something very new, and you see it from the way the Chinese leadership or the Indian leadership or the White House, the way they speak about sovereign funds and pension funds was very different from the way that was practiced in the Reagan or Clinton or Obama or Bush era. And every time the CIO of a large Scandinavian or Canadian pension fund lands in Delhi or Mumbai airport, he's actually welcomed by ministers practically better than a prime minister or the minister of finance, and that says a lot about the world in which we live in today. And of course, Australia, I'm not saying this to flatter the Right Honourable Nick Cherry, but if you look at Australia, of course, if you have collectively pension funds representing 150% of GDP, and you have roughly the same figure in Holland or Canada, well, that makes Canada, Holland, and Australia economic superpowers. Because, let's put it simply that way, in Germany, collectively, all German pension funds, all their assets under management, they barely represent 7% of the GDP. That gives you an idea of how and why the balance of power is shifting, really. And as we say in French, otherwise Napoleon used to say, l'argent est le nerf de la guerre. So really, in that new Cold War, or new hot war, or whatever you want to call it, or new geo-economic rivalry, having these huge long-term assets that you can deploy inwardly or outwardly, like the Chinese government are doing now regarding infrastructure, that will make a big difference. And I will try to conclude on a note of optimism, and I'm speaking under the authority of my historian friend from Columbia University, but really something fascinating is happening right now in Asia. You have seen the new Silk Road that was started 6-7 years ago with the establishment of the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, and now the White House is starting belatedly, but better late than never, to reply economically and financially with something called the Indo-Pacific Vision. And the Indo-Pacific Vision will mean billions of dollars deployed into infrastructure and private equity assets in Asia in the coming quarters. And that new Cold War, we may witness not a fight based on rockets or missiles, but a fight based on investment. So guess what? If you are a potential co-investor, if you are a pension fund, you will be courted. If you're a large pension fund, the odds are that you will be courted both by Beijing and Washington, D.C. for co-investment or for some other reasons. And I think it's not a bad position. It's not a bad position to be in if you're a pension fund right now, if you're being courted by the two big powers, because it means that you will have more opportunities to leverage your balance sheet and deploy more capital across these fascinating, job-creating asset classes that are private equity, venture capital, and infrastructure. Once again, I want to thank our co-chairman, Hubert Danso, who's in Johannesburg today, so he was co-chairing remotely via video link. I want to thank Vincent Vazzi, the president of the World Pensions Council, but he's also a board member of the International Association of Wealth Managers, AIWM, headquartered in Geneva. And thank you once again to the CFA Society of New York for its support. And thank you for your patience, because you've been stoical and you waited all that time. So, and just one more point I want to say before I hand the floor back to our team here, is that I'm told that we should be announcing the inaugural Singapore Economic Forum, which will be held in Singapore on the 27th and 28th of February of 2020. Many of you here are also speakers, of course, at that Singapore Forum, which shall bring together not only Asia-Pacific area sovereign funds, pension funds, policymakers, and central bankers, but also British, American, Canadian, Australian asset owners. And that should be a fascinating event, and I look forward to seeing you soon in Singapore, 27-28 février 2020. À bientôt à Singapour. Merci beaucoup. Merci. Thank you, Mr. Co-Chairman. Thank you. Or the Chief Technical Advisor.
One final thing, we'd also like to do a big thank you to AJ Lamb, who acted as our editor today, and also to Jay Notley on the camera. You've done a superb job. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup. Merci, merci. Merci. Merci.
Can we do, before everyone goes, can we do a shot with everyone?
Yeah, une photo.
If we can just clear the table.
Yeah. Help us clear the table. It's full of my dirty coffee cups.
AJ, want you out? Jay, want you? Everyone?